Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining in time for our first virtual event for spreading awareness about psychological health and suicide prevention called Creating Hope Through Action. A theme we have borrowed from the WHO, but is being presented by us, the Connect Hut. The Connect Hut is a social enterprise which started over 2 years ago with a focus on building practical awareness amongst people regarding psychological health and suicide intentions. As mentioned in the Indian philosophy, the cause of suffering is wrong knowledge. And hence, also, the remedy involves getting the right knowledge. This is the essence that we believe in, because with the word suicide itself, in my over 13 years of experience working in this sector, I haven't come across many words that have been as misunderstood or as much myth has been surrounding this particular word. And hence, this is our humble effort to bring together our esteemed panelists from various sectors where suicide and mental health issues have shown their impact. And we are hoping that today, through their sessions and learnings and experience, we are able to improve on and build on our individual knowledge and practical understanding and awareness on suicide and also psychological health. So my name is Sachin Chitambran. I'm the founder and the lead trainer at the Connect Hut. I would like to, before we start the session, I will be introducing each of the speakers just before their speech goes on. However, before I start, I would like to mention that my colleagues Samriddhi and Renu are available in case during the session, if anyone feels that they may have been emotionally triggered, then please feel free to reach out to them. For those who are present in the Indian subcontinent or in India, we would welcome you to reach out to Samaritans Mumbai, who it's an emotional support helpline which is currently functional, and my colleague Samriddhi will have. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, Sachin.
Yes. Okay. So, like I was mentioning, my colleague Samriddhi would have shared the list, the details for Samaritans Mumbai as well, in case anyone would like to get some emotional support while the session is going. Otherwise, I would welcome you all to just sit back and relax and try to be open for some unlearning and some really great insights from across the industries. Now, to start off our session, I would like to invite Mr. Madhav Saraswat. Mr. Madhav, Dr. Madhav Saraswat has recently assumed the esteemed position of principal and director at the Good Shepherd International School. With a career spanning over 3 decades, Dr. Saraswat possesses a wealth of expertise in teaching, academic administration, team building, and community development programs. Notably, he has served as the CEO of the Sabka Knowledge Hub and founder principal of the Orchid International School in Nashik. Moreover, he dedicated 16 fruitful years to the Doon School as a teacher and housemaster, followed by his role as principal at Scindia School, Gwalior, and most recently as principal of Hyderabad Public School. I would like to welcome Dr. Madhav Saraswat.
Thank you, my friend.
Welcome. Let me just spin you up. There you go. I think now you will be visible to everyone. I hope everyone is able to see Dr. Madhav. Wonderful. Dr. Madhav, please.
Thank you, Sachin, for this introduction, which I don't think that I deserve, because lately I have started realizing that the more I grow in age, the more I realize that what I have been doing with my life, and if I have learned anything at all. And another big factor is that, I have started criticizing my own profession in the institution called school, the school. Thank you for inviting me. Uh, Before I start, I would like to give or share a disclaimer that perhaps, my candid conversation might not be appreciated, but I look at education and the humanity from a different perspective. Being a first speaker today and a reluctant speaker, because usually I don't come online, I usually don't much because I become politically incorrect whenever I let my emotions flow. That's the problem being teacher. Uh, so I would like to talk about two things. One is the bigger picture that how I look at this problem. You talked about three things which I have picked up from your introduction. One is wrong knowledge. Second phrase was right knowledge, and and then third was society, that how it is impacting the community at large. So if we look at the big picture, this is how I look at it. That the world has moved, rather progressed very fast, uh, but outwardly. So the question as a community we need to ask that have we progressed even a bit, even inwardly or not? And my fear is that we have not inwardly. So there is a huge gap between what we see outside or what we feel outside and what we see inside.
I think as of now,
So because of this gap, so this gap is actually the primary reason of whatever unhappiness or the situation we have been discussing. So for example, that, what about other than the cerebral growth, what about our emotional growth, our social, our emotional, our spiritual, and to that extent, even our physical growth? So the world hasn't moved or hasn't cared much about every other aspect of the human being. So that is one premise, I would like all of us to explore through this perspective. Another premise is that, the schools are for humans, of the humans, and managed by the humans. And the question we should be asking ourselves that are we talking about human consciousness at all? Is there anything which talks about human consciousness? So if we are not talking about human consciousness, then it's not one day that society kills you once physically, but this situation, in my opinion, kills you every day. Every day there is a death of some, maybe in some other shape, but you die on daily basis because we have not been working on our human consciousness. And until we start realizing that there is a need to understand that progress and growth means that we evolve as humanity and there is progress in human consciousness. Most of the schools are busy in, preparing children uh, for the livelihood, and there is a race. Every school is busy feeding them, rather overfeeding them with the information, body of knowledge, as they say, as well as skills. But that is it, it stops there. So until unless we understand this situation fundamentally, I think we will not be able to address it in its totality. That's my assumption, and I could be absolutely wrong. As a teacher, I am with you, and there is no doubt that we have a problem in our hands, and this problem is as big or as bad as a pandemic. And I don't see any end to it because there is not much realization about that. So, first is that there is no recognition of the problem. Where is it coming from? Which is called either no knowledge or wrong knowledge. So, if I don't have the understanding that where is it coming from, how do I address it? And last 2 3 years, it has increased significantly. And as a teacher, I understand that I cannot change the community, but I can certainly help the kids, the growing young men and women of this earth. But you can address it to a certain extent. You cannot address it in its totality. So, for example, a school can provide counseling, the right perspective towards life, but cannot fulfill the basic requirement of a family. Because if mental health issue is stemming out of lack of provision, then a school will not be able to help that. So school can work to an extent only. Coming on that where we find that limitation, depending on the nature of the school structure, the causes of the mental health or psychological issues will be different and varied. So, for example, there are schools like low income fee schools. These kids come from limited basic resources. Their desires are unfulfilled. How a school can help? Community would have to come in front. Then there are middle income groups where there is immense pressure of performance. This cohort needs a different kind of approach altogether. Then there are schools which cater only to upper income. They are addicted to facilities, they are addicted to gadgets. Now, this problem would require a different approach altogether. And then there are some other groups like those who come from broken families, or like places like wherever there is a battle, there is a war. So, so in such a situation, when the situation is varied, school can help to certain extent only. All these issues require different kind of interventions and different approach and different skill sets. But there is one thing in common, and that is that all these situations, whenever a child is suffering from any disorder, it affects the self-esteem. And this is where the schools need to intervene, that whenever they see issue with the self-esteem, because self-esteem of the child, such students suffer from low self-esteem, and most of the behavioral, emotional, social psychological issues are manifestation of that low self-esteem. And schools can and must work on that as their most sacred duty. And I would say, instead of duty, they should take it as service. Schools and teachers like me should be asking ourselves that how can I help the child to restore her self-esteem? What should I do to give him like enough confidence or courage to come out of this low self-esteem and start rebuilding his life? And as you said, this requires empathy. Without empathy, you just can't do. That's the most basic requirement, prerequisite. Now, empathy is first cousin of sympathy. It's a sibling, because empathy has 2 3 attributes, in my opinion. Uh, because empathy cannot be there unless there is mindfulness. So sympathy blended or mixed with mindfulness, thoughtfulness, attention, sincerity, and commitment. Because you cannot convert sympathy into empathy unless you understand the issue and you commit yourself to that issue. Another thing which I have understood, and I will give you an example for that, that empathy cannot be and should not be practiced in isolation. And it cannot remain limited to the school. But the problem is that you cannot compel the community to listen, to appreciate, and practice empathy in their lives. So schools would have to create their own ecosystem, small groups where they can practice empathy. And if schools decide for themselves, then approaches could be as follows. There could be pedagogical approach, create a course content where you focus on full student experience, which means that you accept the child as a complete unit and you address the requirements, whether it's a cerebral requirement, intellectual requirement, spiritual, physical, social, or emotional, using mindful practices, contemplative pedagogy, collaborative approach, peer learning, ensure that you create interdependence, you create situation where you have no choice but to trust and you are forced to support each other. There should be time for reflection, there should be time for presentation, there is opportunity to communicate your views, and most importantly, people should know that process is as important as the outcome. So that is one stakeholder which I have been talking about the students, that how we can help the students. But who is helping the students? And if, as a teacher or as a caring adult, if I'm on low on self-esteem, how you can expect me to help the child to come out of that low self-esteem? So this is another aspect of the school ecosystem, that what kind of organization we are part of, how the organization is looking after these adults so that they themselves are not low on self-esteem. They are also treated empathetically so that they can share or extend that empathy to their own students. Many a times we have seen this kind of gap. So what happens that the teacher teaches empathy, and as soon as he or she leaves the classroom, in the corridor, we see that how our teachers are treated. So that is a sad part of our society. The problem is that, if there is a gap in the organizational practices, then kids won't learn, because most of the time they imbibe. Whatever you teach inside the class, they would like to see that in practice. There is one more thing which I have noticed lately, and it is impacting mental health adversely. And that is that the schools or teachers have started behaving like hoarders, where you collect everything. So in the name of 21st century skills, or the world is changing, it is unpredictable, it is volatile, we have to equip our kids for unpredictable world. You keep on feeding them with the information and the skill sets. And the child is lost. The child is lost. and it is having an adverse impact on their self-confidence and self-esteem. I wish teachers could realize that. This overfeed of information in sets has taken away the joy of learning and opportunity to learn enough life skills. This is another major culprit for the poor mental health, in my opinion. And that's why these kids find themselves incapable of facing the challenges. On the other hand, we are also trying to protect them more than required. We are not challenging them enough. And if we don't challenge them enough, then how do we prepare them for the real life? So I think there is a need to focus more on education for life than to education for livelihood. And the solution is empathy. And let's work together to enhance human consciousness and make school a culture where we respect human dignity and we treat each other as humans. Friends, that is all from my side. I hope I made some sense.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saraswat. It was an absolutely insightful session from yourself. Very candid, considering, addressing how schools, being a principal as well, addressing how schools many a times have become a livelihood supplier than a life, how to live life, and being more of a place where a manual is provided to kids into how to actually live, and social emotional gap that is currently present in that. So thank you so much for bringing out those amazing points. Next in line, we have a wonderful speaker who is going to share with us. Moving from Dr. Saraswat, we will be coming to Sanskriti Sinha. Let me just spin them up. Thank you. Great. So Sanskriti Sinha taking over from the Sanskriti, I'm assuming because I have a pin, you may not be able to share properly. See if you can share now. Or should I just first pin you up? There you go. Great. So let me just introduce Sanskriti. Sanskriti is a final year master's student at the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, currently studying applied community psychology, as well as an inspiring doctorate scholar. Her interest in research lies at the intersection of clinical health and social psychology in the form of preventative mental health through exploration of problematic social narratives. An ardent student of psychology, sociology, and philosophy, as well as a sufferer of chronic depression, Sanskriti brings their unique perspectives from various experiences into her work. Today, they will be talking about lived experiences with thoughts of suicide and stigma. And with that, I would like to bring up Sanskriti. Welcome to the panel. It's great having you.
Thanks so much, Sachin. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Okay. Great. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great opportunity. And I especially love that I was called onto this panel to share my lived experiences because I love talking about myself. And the idea behind sharing my experiences with suicidality and depression. Uh, Suicidality, for those who don't know, is a collective word that is used for suicidal ideation, thoughts, plans, and attempts. And the idea behind sharing my story is to highlight some problematic narratives that I have encountered and I would like to spark a conversation around. So I'll get started with a simple statistic. We know that one person dies by suicide every 40 seconds. Um, yep, 40 seconds. That's all it takes. And I personally have been face to face with my 40 seconds about 3 times. And all 3 times I have either been too scared or I've been unsuccessful in my attempts. And that is my story. Basically, it's simple. I am Sanskriti Sinha and I suffer from depression. Um, And I just want to share something I found um, as like a memory on Facebook. This is one of the statuses that I put up. And I remember when exactly it was. I just told my parents that I did not want to study for the pre-medical test anymore and I wanted to drop out of school, which is a big bomb. And after sharing that, I struggled to fully verbalize that I what I wanted was to die, and all I could say was मुझे ठीक नहीं लग रहा, मुझे अकेला छोड़ दो. Because how do you tell the people who gave you life that you don't want to live? And my mental illness initially manifested as some somatic symptoms. I would have constant headaches, disordered sleep, disordered eating, and so I was taken to a primary healthcare provider who then I think sent me to a neurologist or a radiologist, and I was given MRIs and blood tests. And when a physical illness was not found, I was turned to a psychiatrist, and eventually I was put on medication and provided talk therapy and got better. But I remember some very disturbing encounters within those first few months, which honestly don't seem like a big deal because these things happen every day. But when you're caught when you're in the grasp of that depression and you want to give up, these small things end up mattering. And in fact, I would argue that they matter probably the most. And it is small things. It's like I remember I was told to take an IQ test. A psychiatrist to my face said, "Let's make sure that she has the ability to cope with her studies and isn't trying to like use this as an excuse to escape her studies." Like I had to be intelligent and only then my emotions would be valid. Another time I was asked if I was on drugs, which I laughed at the time, but it doesn't seem funny now. I've been told to perk up, snap out of it. I've been told to wake up early. That's that's a good one. All of these great advice, but not relevant to the situation. And that's kind of the first point I want to make, which is that most advice which is given to someone who is depressed is highly optimistic in nature. And that to me was unbearable. It felt like there was a direct minimization or invalidation of what I was experiencing, only because it did not fit this norm of positivity that we have. I mean, guys, come on. The opposite of happy is not wrong. And in hindsight, it seems like this feeling that I was wrong, that I was not enough, was what led me to my first attempt. Um, I have a poem that I wrote on the day of my first attempt. I'll just read the first para, which is: her smile is a disguise, her breezy outlook all lies. At the surface, she seems tough. It's just her heart trying to bluff. Another moment like this one that I recall as being pretty shocking was with a psychiatrist. She asked me what I used to do for enjoyment, and I remember mentioning that I was highly invested in Kohli and Djokovic. To which she made a weird face, and then she told me to stop watching cricket, and she said I was focusing on redundant things. Which, even as an undergrad studying psychology, I could look back and identify that what I was doing was an externalization or displacement of hope, which is a basic maladaptive cognition that happens in depression. But she couldn't, and she was a professional mental health care provider, which, needless to say, I never went back to her again. But watching sports for a long time was a source of strength and hope for me. In fact, this is a quote out of an open letter I wrote to Novak Djokovic on my blog. Doubt he ever read it, but that's kind of the second point I would like to make. If you can pay attention to the third sentence here. It says, "You give me hope when there seems to be none around." Um, and I know from my experience that there is no right way to get through depressive episodes and suicidal phases. And I have personally found comfort in losing myself uh, for a while in sports, in books, and arts. And I let myself get lost till I feel like I have the strength to get out of the house and back to work. Um, and about that, again, here's a poem I blogged about in 2016. If you ever feel dull and soulless, it's okay to lose yourself. Luckily, I have had the privilege to take that time off again and again with every emergence of and relapse into suicidality. And I recognize that not everybody has the same privilege of a supportive and financially secure family. But the point still remains, which is that there is no right way to cope. Uh, there are healthy and unhealthy ways to cope, but there is no right way. And what I've realized through overcoming at least the first year of my depression were two things. The first thing is it feels like you are aware of the ridiculousness of this illness, even while you're experiencing it. You know that showering and eating and going to the market are not, they're not a big deal at all, but you are in the illness's grip and you can't find a way around. So you begin to feel like doing less and thinking less to a point where you're feeling less and you just reach a point of nullity. And the second thing I realized overcoming my first attempt was that suicide is a very romantic idea because it it sends out this smell of liberation. And that's the third point that I would like to make, that it's a romantic idea and no place makes it sound more romantic than the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge is an iconic structure. Uh, it's also a magnet for suicide. There is, in fact, a kind of myth around this bridge. Some believe that traveling between these two towers leads you to another dimension. Others believe that the fall frees you of your worries and your grief. And some believe that the waters can cleanse your soul. This bridge also happens to be right across the bay from UC Berkeley, which is where I did my undergrad. This was right after I'd overcome my first depressive episode and I'd written some profound things in my college essay. Um, for example, I conquered my demons and I now wear my scars like wings, hoping they'll help me soar. But just in a year, though, I was maybe back to square one, or even worse, some would say. That's when I wrote this quote, which is, "Some demons are unconquerable. My wings burned up in flames and left deeper scars than before." One night, unable to feel like I would ever stop feeling this way, I ended up drinking some liquid detergent because I'd seen on TV that it burns holes in your digestive system. And now let me tell you the gruesome truth about these romantic ideas about suicide. Household detergents aren't toxic, it's only the industrial ones. And there is nothing romantic about puking soap bubbles for 2 days. There is also nothing romantic about having to wear full sleeve t shirts in California weather because your arms are covered in knife scars. There is also nothing romantic about surviving a suicide attempt and then feeling like a failure because you can't even kill yourself successfully. Um, but I survived, and eventually I started to normalize these feelings of suicidality. I took a dark, humorous approach to it. It started with memes, as it does for everyone. I think they give you this idea that everyone is depressed and everyone is struggling. And I am unsure of how helpful this narrative is. We've probably normalized psychological distress to an unhealthy extent through these narratives. And that's the fourth point I would like to make. Let me bring your attention to a meme. This one was circulated through the Berkeley netnosphere for a while. And I feel it is partially the prevalence of these narratives that, uh, you know, normalize as well as propagate suicidality and depression. And normalization of such states causes an internalization of the idea that maybe this is who I am. There will be moments when I will be glad to have stayed alive, to have constantly fought my way through the abyss, like when I drove down to the Baker Beach, which is right underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. It was my way of giving the finger to the bridge. But you also know that those good moments will not last. For every good moment, there will be seven bad ones, because perhaps this is who I am. I will forever wander between darkness and light. These are some of my Insta posts at the time. But these bring me to the last point I want to make, which is that there seems to be a predominant narrative around suicide and depression. We only hear two kinds of stories. It's either of people who have struggled and then have given into the abyss by taking their own lives, like Robin Williams, Kate Spade, Virginia Woolf. The other kind of story we hear is of those who went through terrible times but found the strength to overcome them. And my experience has been different than both those stories, because for me it's not been like a dark tunnel at the end of which there's a bright light. It's been more like, if I were to use a metaphor, it's been more like an ocean. You can weather the storm and come out of its eye, but even outside you are still in the middle of the ocean. And there was another attempt around the time I wrote these poems, but I won't read through them because I'm out of time. Um, but the way I've coped through it all over time has been through imbibing a rather unhealthy mantra, which has been, it is what it is. At some point, you accept the struggle. You accept that it's a part of you. I may not like that it's a part of me, but it is something I have to get through every now and then. And that's my story. Uh, it's not over yet. That that is my story, and I don't know what's in the future. I am still in the ocean, despite 5 years on medication, despite multiple therapeutic interventions, despite having almost completed 2 degrees in psychology. But for me, the matter is not so much of finding some great meaning in the struggle. For me, it's knowing that when it comes again, it will be hellish, but I'll survive, and maybe I'll learn something from it. I have learned in my own suicidality that emotions can sometimes be more powerful than facts. I have learned how to empathize. I have learned how to have the courage to speak to people who are in their abyss. It has given me a passion for research, for philosophical thought, for vitality itself. And my first thought when something doesn't go my way or I find myself drowning in assignments is still, I wish I was dead. But it is what it is. And though I may be societally perceived to be weak, because that's the stigma, I know I am not. Because I think it takes more courage to live. And that's my story. It's 4 simple words and 5 simple realizations. And I would like to end with the words of one of my favorite comedians, Rohan Joshi. He says, "What we have, what we deal with, what we live with, it isn't always nice and it isn't always pretty, but it is. You are, I am, and we really should stay." Yeah, that's it. That's all I have.
And you did share, and what have you shared. Thank you so much for that very strong and very candid sharing of experience, Sanskriti. for any questions that one may have towards Sanskriti as well, please feel free to share it in the chat. We will not be asking the questions straight away. However, we will be trying to answer the questions at the end of the session, or we will be transferring the questions to our speakers so that we can get back to you with the answers that they have shared. I mean, that in the meantime, I think my voice is again a bit low. Let me just check. Okay, so in the meantime, I would like to introduce Mr. Scott Armstrong, who is here as well, who's our next speaker. I'm really glad that Scott brings more than 3 decades of content creation, engaging audiences and building communities to his vision at Mental. He is the founder of Mental UAE. This new platform is determined to tackle the stigma of mental health head-on through the power of inspiring content and trusted through thought leadership. His enviable regional network is built on more than a decade in countries like UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Skilled at uniting private and public sectors around causes, he is a passionate mental health advocate with a network of experts regionally and internationally. We are really glad you have joined us, Scott, to give us a perspective from the corporate side of things, where you have a lot of exposure, and you are bringing to us the topic Corporate Connect, assessing mental health struggles and interventions amid professional pressures in UAE. Thank you so much, Scott. Please take it away.
Thank you, Sachin. I think I should open really by saying that I don't think anybody who just listened to the last 15 minutes could think that our speaker was weak. You're not weak. That's one of the bravest things I've listened to. So thank you for sharing those experiences. And it's amazing the stigma that, you know, a young person there has had to deal with. I kind of want to just give you a little insight into why I launched Mental and why I'm so keen to talk about this so much. Mental, as Sachin said, is a platform that tries to tackle the stigma of mental health wherever we find it, in the community, for our children, but also in the workplace. Why is that so important? Because we are, I mean, whether you celebrate this figure or are slightly alarmed by it, we're due to spend a third of our lives in the office, in the workplace. I think the figures say that in general, we're going to be spending about 40,000 hours at the workplace. So it's going to have a significant impact on our lives. The reason that I woke up to my own mental health and the growing problem about mental health was on the other end of the spectrum from our speaker. My father was a very successful CEO. And this is a man who was a self-made man. He came from what we would describe as poverty in the UK. Got a scholarship to one of the best schools, rose himself up, brought himself out of his circumstances, got a fine degree, started a business, and then founded a global company. And by the age of 68, just throttling back a little bit, but still, this is a man who was one of the strongest men I've ever met. A man who never talked about his feelings, but very successful, a high achiever. And at the age of 68, he suffered a mental health breakdown. And within 3 months, he was dead. He was gone. And I remember looking down at his body in the open casket at the funeral and having a conversation with him. And really, I'm having a conversation with myself, saying that we'd never spoken about our feelings in that way. You know, we'd never dove into mental health and how we were doing. And at that point, I vowed to have more open conversations. And the first person I was going to start with was myself, which as a 50-year-old, I'm still having that conversation with myself, and I'm still on a journey. There are still traumas from my past which I need to make peace with. But what it also showed me was that achievement, success, age, experience, monetary compensation, None of that
That's
is a
also good
shield
to know.
to mental health. So that's basically where mental was born. And it's fascinating again to talk about the stigmas that still exist. I've only just discovered in the last 3 months on a family holiday that my father was actually suffering from depression in the months leading to his death. We knew he was struggling with addiction, but we didn't know, or I didn't know, he was struggling with depression, and he couldn't speak to anybody about it. His wife only found out about it in the days before his death. And again, it was something that was hidden. On the same holiday, in fact, as well, I found out that a cousin in my family who was always a high flyer. He was an international businessman, had businesses in South Africa, went around the world, had plenty of money, plenty of cars, plenty of good times. We were told he had died in a car crash in South Africa. He, in fact, had committed suicide in a bedsit in my hometown. So I've got a sort of family experience with us feeling the need to cover up and not talk about mental health and suicide, which is fascinating. So I think it's important to stress that there's no one demographic that is impacted by suicide. I suppose if I wanted to talk about the world of work right now, and I've got to look at this through a UAE lens, and here in the UAE, we're actually somewhat fortunate in that our rate of suicide is actually almost half the world average. We've got a suicide rate of 4.2 per 100,000, according to the World Health Organization. But one life is too many. And secondly, we still don't quite know how accurate that figure is, because the UAE, to its credit, is on a journey regarding suicide. It's only in the last few months, in the past year, that suicide has been decriminalized officially in the eyes of the law. Now, in 2019, the UAE launched a helpline to tackle suicide. But it's interesting to see that since 2019, that suicide rate has crept up nearly by 0.5% already in a nation where we think everything is pretty good. But actually, when you scratch the surface and when you look at the figures, and particularly related to the workplace, actually, it's a tale of two cities in some ways, because recent Cigna research shows us that even in the UAE, which scores very high for metrics for general well-being, when we look at the workplace, the statistics for burnout here are almost world leading. 98% of the people who responded to their global 360-degree survey said that they were struggling with symptoms of mental health. And it's fascinating because we have a society that's working harder than ever before. And I think actually, if we look around the world, I think many people on this call would agree that actually all of us, wherever we are in the world, are probably working harder than we ever have. The lines between work and home life have been blurred significantly, particularly by digital technology, WhatsApp, which is the bane, or used to be the bane of my life before I started this business. They have blurred significantly. We saw one report recently that showed that the average working week, which I'm sure many of the listeners and viewers to this call can relate to, is now in the UAE at 50 hours per week, which I believe Sachin was telling me was the standard working week there for you in India. But the working week is going up. The lines between work and home life are blurred. Our ability to disconnect is harder than it's ever been before. We know about the impact that social media can have on our children, and I know our first speaker spoke about that as well. But we are struggling with this. So it was fascinating to see that not only are we struggling with burnout, we are also more disengaged from our workplace than ever before. we have another piece of research. And sorry, as a former journalist, I call myself a recovering journalist, and I'm sure Amrit will talk about this later. But journalism is actually quite a toxic profession. We have a lot of insecure leaders in our profession. We are a vain and insecure bunch. I've been suffering with imposter syndrome all my life. So I describe myself as a recovering journalist. But with all of these studies, we recently saw that McKinsey, which is obviously a serious management institute that gets paid a tidy sum to tell the world of work what it needs to know about what's happening under the bonnet of the workplace. It found here in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE that 66% respondents were now struggling with their mental health. Now, I know that the World Health Organization figure will tell you that 1 in 4 globally are struggling with their mental health. Here in the UAE, that is 1 in 3, in fact. But the McKinsey research tells you that that is actually now 2 in 3. And actually, the majority of us are suffering. If we look at leadership, even the leaders are struggling. Bupa had a recent survey here in the UAE, which pegged 55% of bosses were looking to leave their job and move to a different profession to seek a better work-life balance. They even coined a term for it, the global boss loss. Amid that background, we have disengaged employees. Employees here in the UAE are now 70% of employees in the UAE are now disengaged. Now, here's a really important thing that at Mental, we try and tell the C-suites and the world of work that actually, if you change the culture, you're going to make more money. That positive mental well-being in the workplace is good for business, because the flip side, the reverse, is absolutely true. And a study by Gallup recently calculated the cost here in a UAE, which is a population of just over 10 million, 10.1 million, the cost was $10.3 billion a year. It worked out at $1.1 million an hour that business is losing through the poor mental health of its workforce. And we've actually created this real-time calculator that just ticks up by the second, which we sit in front of CEOs and just put this on in the background and let them get really nervous as they see this figure spiraling up. There is a cost of poor mental health, not just to business in terms of profit, but obviously in human life. Why is this so important that we tackle cultures inside businesses? Well, we have now got a burnout problem. Again, if we talk about the figure from 98% that Cigna found here within the UAE, burnout is prevalent. It is now everywhere. Now, burnout, the global research shows us if you're suffering from burnout, you are nearly 3 times more likely to commit an act of suicide. This is particularly focused here in this region when we look at male suicide. The global figures and I'm sure other speakers have covered this before, but we saw last year 700,000 people committed suicide last year. 77% of them were men. And we have a real challenge here with men, particularly in this Arabic culture. And I know within the expat community from India and Asia, of this stigma where we cannot open up. But please believe me, when I look at, when I talk about my father, even from a Western perspective, the conversation might be getting slightly easier in the UK, but we have still got a very, very long way to go. So that's really where I wanted to kind of open this conversation up and talk about, if you are in a leadership position, we really need to be looking at changing the cultures. Now, what can we do about it? Now, the temptation we've seen, and it's interesting to see the rise of the term well washing, and how many of us have worked in offices that have a pool table that we will never ever play on because nobody in the company dare play on it. Or we are told that we should go on a mindfulness course, or maybe a time management course because we're struggling. So of course, a time management course will help us cope better with the pressures. Now, there's a really interesting new piece of research out from Oxford University that shows that these types of measures are super, super counterproductive. And why are they so counterproductive? It's because we are telling the employee that it's their fault, that it's their inability to cope with the culture that has been created within the company. It is their failing. They are too inefficient to deal with a workload, rather than looking at the base culture inside the company. And thus these well-washing measures, be that the time management course, be that the pool table, be that the mindfulness, actually ends up putting more focus on the individual feeling that they are somehow to blame. And that's the biggest problem we see with stigma inside companies and externally, is that so many people feel alone. They feel it is just them. And these corporate measures make people feel more lonely. We know that loneliness is now a public health crisis in the US. The US Surgeon General has said and has shown that it is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes today and pushes you towards burnout. And then burnout pushes you more likely towards suicide. So it's time for us to actually stop ticking boxes and focus on the underlying cultures within inside companies, because we're working too hard and the cost is too high. And I think that's actually is where I'll leave this talk.
Thank you so much, Scott. Again, bringing a lot of insights from the work-life perspective. This is a struggle that even we face as an organization that is working in training different organizations and helping their employees as well, where everywhere the conversation is like, can you please talk about mental well-being rather than mental health issues? Because apparently if we just keep talking about the good stuff will stop happening. Even
toxic positivity.
Exactly. So this is toxic positivity practiced on a corporate scale. So we are hoping that hearing you as well, there would be some interesting conversations that can begin. We are hoping that this video can reach out to even people working in the corporate sector, so that brings in some level of insight and knowledge to them as well, because somehow the theme today is providing the right knowledge.
And if the corporate world is listening to this, can I give them one statistic, which is the return on investment from embracing this is 364%. Now, I'm not sure there are many cryptocurrencies out there that are offering a return on investment of 364%. So it is good business to be a good business.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much, Scott. And again, to try and keep up with the all the speakers that we have got for us this evening, I would like to say thank you to Scott. And from moving from the corporate world to human rights, the next speaker is going to be Kamaini Mahabal. Kamaini, can I see you?
Yes. Yeah, you can't see me. That's the network issue here. But I hope you are watching my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen, Kamaini. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I'll just introduce you quickly. I know we have only got 10 minutes post that, but Kamaini is an independent consultant and trainer in the sectors of gender, health, and human rights. Kamaini is a passionate human rights advocate and a former Chevening Scholar at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the London University. She has a rich background in journalism and clinical psychology. And over the past decade, she has actively researched and campaigned for against human rights violations, bridging the gap between online and offline activism. As a founding member of the organization Ehsaas, she provides legal aid to victims of oppression in Punjab. Kamaini's expertise extends to international human rights, legal counseling, and empowering women's rights through education and training. Kamaini is also head of induction with Samaritans Mumbai and digital media head at Women and Health Together for Future. Her work aims to translate human rights principles into action at the grassroots level, fostering a more just and equal world. Really happy to have your thoughts here today, Kamaini. Kamaini will be speaking specifically about Indian women, the context of suicide and with mental health issues with Indian women, unveiling their silent suffering. Thank you so much, Kamaini, for joining in, and please take it away.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sachin. And thank you to the speakers, Sanskriti and Scott, for sharing your experiences, and Dr. Madhav laying the ground with empathetic listening. And Scott, you actually starting from what is happening in the male scenario, we'll come to what is happening to women, especially Indian women. And I am here now on behalf of Women and Health Together for Future, which is an international organization with membership from 22 countries. Sadly, but India is the capital of suicide, and Indian men make up around quarter of global suicides, while Indian women make up 36% of global suicides in the age of 15 to 39 years. In India, 6.6 per 100,000 women compared to the global suicide rate of 5.4. So you see how high it is. And in the area of domestic violence, 1/3 of Indian women, like 1 in 3 women, take their lives, have a history of domestic violence. But sadly, in our National Crime Record Bureau data, it is not even a cause. And if we look at National Mental Health Survey, the Indian National Mental Health Survey of 2015 and 16, the prevalence of suicidality, non-fatal suicidal thoughts and behavior among Indian women is 1.5 times greater than among Indian men. This survey also noted that suicidality was consistently higher among women than men across age groups, socioeconomic strata, and the regions of residence. So this is 2021, the latest NCRB statistics. 45,026 women died by suicide in India in 2021. One woman died by suicide every 9 minutes. 63 homemakers died by suicide every day. I'm just calculating by the time our webinar is over how many women have died. Now, if we go by the number of women in various groups, if we see, so the housewives and the homemakers are number one with 23,178, followed by students, 5,000 plus, professionals and salaried women, 1,700, daily wage earners, 4,246, women engaged in farming sector, 653, and self-employed, 1,426. I would take with a pinch of salt again the data by NCRB, which is just the tip of the iceberg. But still, if we say if this is the official data given us by the Indian government, if we apply the Bayes theorem, which all the analysts must be aware of, the probability of death due to suicide jumps more than 200-fold for an Indian woman who is a homemaker. And sadly, housewives and homemakers are invisible. In fact, Scott, I think in the corporate world or in the economics, we see how much unpaid labor does an Indian woman will do, starting in the morning, how she is not getting paid. But I mean, I feel it's like, I think in one of the McKinsey reports, it's like a $1 trillion industry. I mean, if we see that if we had to pay the housewives how much work they do. The top 3 states are Tamil Nadu, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, as you see. So this clearly shows education. There is no relation of education here anyway. So why is that? We'll go there. While more men, 118,979 had died by suicide in India than women, but there is a deviation from the pattern observed in those aged below 18, where the incidence of suicide was higher in females. And the top causes are family problem, love affairs, failure in exams, among others. So as we know, housewives, they are totally financially dependent, they are less aware, and they have their no own source on any opportunity, are left to struggle alone with depression and anxiety. So I would say patriarchy kills. And this is all about patriarchy, irrespective you're educated or not, you're from a high caste, low caste, from a different religion, patriarchy is killing. And this patriarchy is killing in the form of various, we see the Indian woman dying by suicide, husband's alcoholism is one of the major causes. child and forced marriages, domestic violence, the social stigma of leaving the marital home. When sometimes during counseling or, whenever I get DV cases, it's like logically you'll ask, why the hell is she living in a violent relationship? Why doesn't she get out of it? I mean, it is so easy for us to say, right? But where is the support system? And that is, we'll be talking about later as well. Maladjustment with a new environment post-marriage. And usually in arranged marriage, you're going to a totally different atmosphere, different people, right? Scott, in the offices or even otherwise, two people, whether they'll get along or not, is a big thing. And here a woman is actually going to change her full life by being in a different environment. Strict gender norms forcing women to live under high levels of surveillance. Now, this is something, especially in North India, in Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, I would say. Patriarchy is so much that I actually love talking to students, and whenever I go there, they tell me that on Valentine's Day, our parents are not going to let us get out of the house. Why? Because boys will be standing outside and they'll be like security guard following them everywhere. So the sexual harassment, street sexual harassment. So under surveillance, actually imprisoned. I feel the women are imprisoned in their houses. We did talk about, Dr. Madhav did talk about the fact, the family, what family can do. But sadly for Indian women, family and marriage is the most unsafest place, actually, for the domestic violence. And also there is a high burden of domestic labor. So gender-based violence, childbearing, rearing, or even infertility, widowhood, divorce. I mean, these are the social determinants, which we don't talk about when we clearly look at from a biomedical or even a mental health perspective. These determinants need to be looked very carefully. So at least 50% of all the suicides among women could be dowry related, but they are underreported because the parents of the girl are involved in dowry giving, and giving dowry is also crime. So sadly, under the dowry law, receiving and giving dowry is both crime. So there is going to be a complaint. Which girl would want her parents to be behind bars in the marriage because the dowry is there? Although we have few cases where now the girls are refusing that, to take dowry. This is Oxfam is also an international organization, and they did a very interesting survey in the Bimaru states, as you call Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Jharkhand, where they asked for the behavior acceptance of the husband of what the wife does. So it was acceptable to harshly criticize a woman if she failed to care well for the children. And 33% said it was acceptable to beat a woman for the same reason, that if you don't take care of children. I mean, excuse me. I mean, she's not married alone, right? What is the responsibility of the husband? So just have a look at this graph, okay? What do the men feel that when you disobey men in the family, beat a woman, if you disobey in the family, 24.3% are saying maro, and 42.6% are saying you harshly criticize. Similarly, spending money without asking. I mean, is she still a minor or a child who needs a guidance? Again, dependency, financial dependency. Fail to care for children. Now, leave a dependent, ill adult unattended. She should be beaten. 60% said she should be beaten. Fail to prepare a meal for men in the family. Again, 67. Khana. And, I mean, in India, I think in all the Asian cultures, woman is the last one to eat. She has to give the family everything or bath. And in the end, if there is something left, she will eat that. And that's why women are also a lot of cases of malnourishment, and even maternal mortality is very high because of this reason. Fail to prepare meal for men in the family, fail to fetch water and firewood for the family. In rural India, women have to walk sometimes a day or 2 days also just to get water. Because although we have digital India or whatsoever, but there are places where the basic, food, shelter, water is still not available, right? And when she fails to do that, it is okay to beat her. She leaves the house without the permission of the husband and the family. 86% say that beat her. Harshly criticize her. 54% say that you beat her. As I said, imprisoned, no freedom, totally dependent, and absolutely, and just imagine being in such a violent situation. What mental health repercussions are we going to have? I mean, definitely, obviously, depression is one of them, anxiety is one of them. Okay, so what I call this is a spiral of violence, which I mean, it's like from womb to tomb. I'm not going to read it. I mean, you can just read it. But when you are born, first of all, you are unwanted as a girl in India. Nobody wants a girl; they want a boy, because again patriarchy is playing here. What will happen to my name? What will happen to the property? So in case of Punjab and Haryana, it is more related to the property, the division of the property. You are born, you are unwanted, then as I said, undernourished, medical care. Child, if you're a child and you have a brother will go for the schooling first, and if you have the money, the girl will go, otherwise not. You become a teenager, the issue of again street sexual harassment, rape, controlling sexuality, even after marriage, whether to have a child or not. Do the husband and wife talk about it? No, it is the family which decides, right? And it's woman's body, and if she says she does not want, and we do have a medical termination of pregnancy act which clearly says that a woman, if she decides to abort a child, she has a full right to do that under certain conditions. But then again, what doctors do, doctors say, no, please get somebody from your family with you, only then we will abort. So there has been a full campaign against that. And now the new law has been amended by saying that even single women can abort. I mean, marriage is not essential, which we have been talking for so long about that. Then again, digital. We talked about digital media, cyber stalking. I mean, it's so much, it's so high these days, and it's also affecting the generation, and especially in relationship issues, this whole blocking from your social media sites and all, leading to lot of mental health issues. Date violence is there, isolation. I mean, as we go along, the violence in the in-laws family, and as you grow old, so when you are born, you have a father. If you don't, then you have a brother. If you don't have a brother, you need to have a boyfriend or a husband. So you need to have a man in your life to stay alive in society. And then if you don't have a son, you will be ridiculed. And if you don't have a son, finally the abuse is there. And then, as per the Indian culture, when you die, who will actually burn the funeral pyre? These cultural contexts where patriarchy is still holding so strong, although we all are trying to smash it, this is such a complex that at each and every step in a woman's life, there is violence in one or the other form. So yeah, I'm ending soon. And this is something I was just thinking. So you see these two pictures, rural women sitting together. And these are these urban women sitting together. This concept of kitty party. I don't know how many people know that. We ridicule it, kitty party, fashion, gossip and all. But actually when it started in rural areas where a woman did not have economic independence. So they sort of got together to collect money, and this is one space where they can get out of the house and talk about it, So this sort of becomes a support mechanism for various mental health issues, and problems with the women are facing. WTF had we did a COVID-19, just a behavior survey we did, and when it started in 2020, this study was in 7 countries. It was a rapid survey. It was in Egypt, Philippines, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Haiti, and USA. Only in India, this was an unintended outcome, because we didn't have anything specific, or suicide as such, but at least mental health and stress. So this was an unintended outcome. And as you see in male and female, if you see the ratio, the stress is very high, and especially in Mumbai, it's really high. The non-binary and gender non-conforming, well, the sample was very low. So we had like, this is a sample of 1,500 from Bombay and 500 from Varada, having a rural Bombay thing. And non-binary, we need some more research to say that, they are really suffering. So what is to be done, or what is being done? So the government has started one-stop crisis centers. I was working with Sehat in early 2000 when Dilasa in Mumbai at the Bhabha Hospital, they started this, everything together under one roof. So there will be a doctor, there will be cops, there'll be emotional counseling there, forensic, everything. So a woman doesn't have to go, but are they functioning? The question is, your intention is very nice, but are you finally implementing? We also have government domestic violence helplines. Are they functioning? Has there been any research and survey on that? Although we have tried, and many a times it is not. So what's happening here? What is happening is there is a no multi-stakeholder or a multi-pronged strategy which is needed. What is needed is safe and empowering spaces for women. So we are having online and offline support groups. As I'm also working with Samaritans on March 8th on International Women's Day, we had launched listening circles. We had launched listening circles generally for everybody. But as the circles went on, we did see that whatever issue we were discussing, the women and girls were coming more forward. And the issue of gender-based violence was very much in it. So as we see the bio-eco model, which has, the individual, the relationship, the community, the society as a whole. And now we know that our government has had a preventive strategy is putting after so long by Dr. Vijay Kumar, Befrienders India's. She has been like for, I think, more than a decade doing that. But then again, if we are going to keep it exclusively in mental health, like again, the experiences of our speaker with the psychiatrist, or we have, why can't we have community mental health workers, and in Samaritans, we are trying that to build up empathetic listening. So you need not have a psychology background to be a good listener and empathize. So empathetic listening, I think, needs to spread further everywhere in order that everybody could then become a support. Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm in my time.
Thank you so much, Kamayani. You may
stop sharing.
Stop the sharing.
I can't see the stop. What do I do?
Let me try and help you out here.
Okay.
I hope that is gone. Great. Thank you so much, Kamayani, for sharing that. Like you have mentioned, the silent systemic hurt or damage that Indian women are going through. And thank you so much for bringing it up and understanding it's showing us the relevance that it has to mental health issues and even suicide for that matter. And again, like as we are trying to keep up with the speakers that we have got for you as well, we have a brilliant speaker next coming up. That would be General Neeraj Bali. Sir, are you available? Yes.
Yes, very much.
Wonderful. Let me just pin you up here. Thank you so much, General Bali, for attending here today. I would like to introduce Major General Neeraj Bali. He's a Sena Medal receiver who is part of the faculty currently of Institute for Competitive Intelligence, Germany. Major General Neeraj Bali is an Indian Army veteran who served for 37 years as an infantry officer. He has extensive experience in counterinsurgency operations, especially in Kashmir. After his retirement, he has been CEO of a rural education society running 92 schools and colleges in villages and CEO of an engineering company too. He's a global speaker and has delivered talks at leading educational and corporate organizations in India, the US, Portugal, and Germany. He's also a management advisor to a few companies. And MSc and MPhil, he's a faculty for the Institute, like I mentioned earlier, like the Institute for Competitive Intelligence, Germany, and an executive fellow of a Hyderabad-based university. His book on organizational culture is being released by Pan Macmillan this year. Really honored to have you with us, Major General Neeraj Bali, and you would be bringing us the insight on hidden battles addressing mental health concerns within the armed force. And we are really waiting to hear your insightful talk, sir. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Sachin. I've heard with great fascination the entire spectrum of very professional views of all the speakers who spoke so far, and I'm waiting for the next ones. My brief is somewhat limited in the sense that I'm talking about a very small, if important, part of our population, and that is soldiers of the army. When I say army, there could be any army, and certainly subcontinent army. It could be Pakistani army or Indian army, which is pretty much alike. I know there are some friends from Pakistan present today here. So the point that we first need to begin with is, where do these soldiers come from? It's a no-brainer, but sometimes we do forget that the soldiers come from the exact same demographic, carrying the same anxieties, same upbringing, same educational background, same small town, village backgrounds that everybody else has. So they are not isolated, they're not sitting on an island, though they are isolated by way of geography most of the time. The perspective I'm going to present is not a scholarly perspective. It is very personal, very anecdotal. All the experience that I've gathered over the years as an infantry officer, where you serve mostly on the borders, mostly in tough areas, and you are dealing with soldiers all the time. Now, I have served in several areas, as all of us do. Nothing special about that. But when I came back home from Kashmir, my wife pointed out that every time somebody banged the door hard, I would sit up in the bed, startled, because as a commanding officer of a battalion, my concern was always things like grenade blasts. Now, this is a trivial point, perhaps, but it just gives you a little peek into, at a very superficial level, that there are mental health issues, that there are issues that weigh on every soldier's mind. And you may come out of a counterinsurgency area, but the counterinsurgency area never comes out of you. So you carry it all the way back into peace stations, wherever you serve later on. It's equally, in fact, that while mental health and things like PTSD are matters of a great deal of concern and focus in Western armies, we in the Indian Army, and I dare say the Pakistani Army, have probably been somewhat apathetic to the whole issue. For whatever reasons, we probably haven't paid that much of attention. Certainly, that was the case when I was serving 7 years ago. Now, what really goes on? First of all, there is this added level of a layer of stress, which is added to every soldier who's serving in difficult areas. And let me just sort of paint the picture for you again. There is this whole thing about the serving in an operational condition where you leave the unit in the morning, you're not sure you're going to come back alive, or you're not going to end up being maimed. So this is playing on your mind. Now, there is nobody in this whole earth that I've met who's not worried about these things, who's not scared. Now, there is, of course, the physical danger, but then there is climate. I've served in areas where the snowfall is 35 feet, where temperatures can dip to -50. One cannot even begin to imagine. Even I can't begin to imagine now those areas where I served. They definitely add to it. Add to that isolation, sitting in bunkers. When I was serving on the line of control, I was in an underground bunker for 3 years. Of course, I would come up and down, but pretty much the only people I could talk to were other soldiers. And there was really nobody else, not even another officer, to share anything with. And then there is the element of deprivation. I'm sure all of us know that officers and men serve alternately in peace stations and field areas. And when you're in field areas, you don't live with your families. So pretty much the children grow, without your intervention most of the time. But of course, it affects you. In the case of soldiers who come from rural areas, from where they cannot bring their wives, even in a peace station sometimes, it's amounts to serving all your life without your family, except for going back on leave. So now all these layers I think all of this has exacerbated the issues or sort of increased the issues, particularly in the minds of those who already have certain tensions, who already are suffering mentally in some way or the other. I dare say that mobile phones have added to it. It may sound like dark humor to you, but when I joined in my first ever posting to Arunachal Pradesh, which was to be called NIFA in those days, it took me 6 to 7 days to reach the unit area. So if some letter had to come from my home, it would take 7 or 10 days or maybe 14 days. And mostly the problem was over by the time I got it. Whatever had to happen had happened. But now you have a ball-by-ball commentary, and here's a soldier giving guard duty at night all by himself and on the phone with his wife and coming to know of all the problems that are happening back home. So all this has added to the situation. There is, of course, a plus side. And the plus side is that army units, particularly infantry battalions, they act much more like families than, I dare say, what happens in the corporate sector. Life in the army is not transactional, not to the degree as it is outside. Everything is relational. So people do tend to connect. People do take care of each other. A commanding officer or a company commander will know every soldier by name, most soldiers by their what's going on back home. So that helps. And then there is this very vibrant social side of the army. We do not interact with each other as stag people. There is no such thing as going out on a drink with your team. It's always family to family. So those family connections help you in a very big way. Our wives are very intimately involved in talking to soldiers' wives, and they bring the feminine input to all of us, or whatever is happening, which needs to be corrected. But having said all this, it is my experience from the armed forces that people who need the help the most among the soldiers are usually the least equipped to open up. They do not possess the propensity to simply walk up. In any case, soldiers being in the soldierly environment find it very hard to open up about their vulnerabilities. And it is definitely a leadership function to look into all this, not an HR function. It's a leadership function to keep looking into this aspect all the time and see who is likely to be suffering, who needs help. And that's really something we need to do. So what I'm going to talk about, a couple of incidents, they are purely from leadership point of view, from the point of view of teamwork. I err if I give you the impression that I'm talking about my leadership, because I'm not. I'm just giving you the stories that I know the best. When I went to Kashmir as a commanding officer of a battalion, I was very aware that soldiers, 1,000 of them who served with me, would be under varying degrees of stress from issues back home. So I thought about this and I adopted something, and it's not very novel. I'm sure many commanding officers do it. What happens in field areas is that when a soldier writes a letter, the letter is then censored by his immediate superior, a subedar, right? The idea is that we should not end up giving away security. I passed an instruction that all such letters would be dumped or brought to the headquarters, where I will every single day read 5 letters at random. And so will my second in command, so will be my head clerk, so will be my staff officer, 20 to 25 letters at random. And the reason I gave out, which was not true, is that I'm wanting to see who is not carrying out his job of finding out security lapses. The fact of the matter is I couldn't care less about the security lapses. The soldiers don't really know enough to really leak out anything. My concern was that I might spot a few cases where a person is in depression or he's facing serious problems. And it's my lifetime's experience that when a senior officer looks at a draft of a paper, his eyes straight away fall on the mistakes. This is somehow, I don't know, it's a phenomena. I can't explain it. And I was hoping that I would similarly catch a few things. In the 3.5 years that I was a commanding officer, I spotted only 2 cases, but I will talk about one of them. There was an exchange of letters between a tribal soldier from Jharkhand and his daughter. And it was very poignant because you could make out that perhaps the soldier's wife was having an affair. And the daughter was persuading her dad not to take leave and come home because the situation could get ugly. Now, here's the soldier defending his country, serving in the hardest part, and here he's carrying a secret under his breast that he's not about to share with anybody. So when I read this, I went to the company, which was about 2 hours from me. I called the company commander. I said, point out this soldier to me. He pointed out. And I said, when we go out for any operation, I want this boy to somehow walk next to me. So he said, all right. And off we went we must have walked 10, 12 kilometers, whatever. This soldier was walking with me. And every question that I asked him, how's everything? How's everything at home? How are you feeling? The answer was what every Indian Army soldier gives. Sab theek hai, sir. All is good. Everything is perfect. He wouldn't, of course, tell. And at the end of the day, when we finished, I said, you look very fit to me. What are you doing in a company? Why can't you be the commanding officers in my special team? Why can't you be my buddy? And he looked at it as a great honor. And he said, sure, sir, I would. And I said, fine. You pick up your baggage, and from now you're going to serve with me. What was I trying to do? He never disclosed anything to me. I do not know what the problem was solved or not solved. All right. What I was trying to do in my own limited way was to boost one man's social self-esteem and to tell him that he's wanted, that he's loved, that he's somebody. And I was hoping this will be a bit of a balm on his frayed nerves and on his soul. That was my understanding as a 35-year-old. I did what I could do. So I hope that the story went well. But a story that did not go well is somebody came outside my office and fired a burst from an AK-47. I really hope to God that none of you have heard a burst of an AK-47 in an enclosed space, because it makes god-awful noise, which you can never forget. And initially I thought that maybe, we are under attack and something is happening. But when I came out and I made this stupid mistake of coming out where the fire came from, I saw a soldier with glazed looks and an AK-47, and no matter what you said to him, he wouldn't lower his weapon. And gradually I decided that it's risky anyway. So I started walking towards him and talking to him, and finally we managed to grab him. What was his problem? He said, I had come to commit suicide. And I said, thank you very much for trying to do this outside the commanding officer's office. But haven't I told you that I'll bend every rule in the book and help you? You just have to tell me what the problem is. And he initially cried, and then he said, what do you think of yourself? Are you God? What problem will you solve? I'll tell you the problem. This boy came from a western state in our country. He had just been posted to my unit 15 or 20 days ago. And he had come to know that his father was having an illicit relationship with his wife, who was taunting him in letters. He said, fix the problem. What can you do? We did fix the problem. That's another story, and I don't want to get into technicalities. We broke a few rules. We moved him to Gujarat. We had his wife brought there. And, well, again, I can hope that the situation turned out well. I just gave you these 2 examples. I'm going to end now by telling you that the army did once a very detailed examination of cases of fratricide, where people under stress fire on other soldiers and kill them. And there was a year, 1997, when it became a bit of a rash. I'm happy to tell you that it just stopped after that, because that inquiry found some great wisdom, which I'm going to share with you. It said the number one reason why people under mental stress go over the tipping point is when somebody violates their dignity. And we came under severe orders to make sure to get this feudal mindset out of our heads and to really start behaving in a way that doesn't violate anybody's dignity. What are my conclusions? My number one conclusion, of course, is whoever has this case, whoever has this issue, and I'm sure the army is looking into it, should get professional help. There is no substitute for professional help, not commanding officers like me or anybody else, but that's the number one reason. But the number 2 conclusion I have is you need more than you need dollops of empathy, not sympathy. You need dollops of empathy to understand other human beings as to what is going on in their heads. And if you really look hard and get off your ego's hobby horse and listen to people, I think you can learn a lot. And empathy is the starting point. The next thing is people working with you must feel safe, not just physically, but psychologically. And this is a big failing in the corporate sector also, where the relationships are so transactional. Life is so stressful that nobody really cares for, people feeling safe. And of course, finally, the number one thing which people want is they want recognition. They want to be wanted. And I think as leaders, as their colleagues, as team members, that is what we should focus on. If we do, then I'm sure through this action, we'll be creating hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Major General Neeraj Bali, to have such a candid conversation coming from someone from the army background. We had conversations on patriarchy and everything just before this. However, understanding where law, structure, rigidity in terms of life and death is so important in the military setup. And from there, having an emotional side and talking about empathy as well, I feel is a very, very big thing. And thank you for bringing up that point. And, and coming from you, sir, we believe that the message will go further into the society as well. So thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
And again, we will be now moving to our next speaker. We have a wonderful speaker, Dr. Azhar Hakim. Doctor, you are available?
Yes. Can you see me?
There you go. We can see you now. Wonderful to have Dr. Hakim here with us. Dr. Azhar Hakim is the Director of Outpatient Services at Samarpan, which is a recovery and de-addiction service center based in Pune. Dr. Azhar Hakim obtained his medical degree from Nair Hospital, Mumbai, and his master's degree in psychology from Washington University in St. Louis, USA. He served as a director of clinical services at Catholic Charities Behavioral Health Sciences Services in USA before returning to India to set up private practice in 2010. He currently serves as director of outpatient services at Samarpan, a behavioral healthcare facility that provides services to people coping with addictions, trauma, eating disorders, and other mental health conditions. Now, Doctor, we have had some really interesting points, especially coming from where Kamaini had stopped about the silent suffering of Indian women, where a big point was taken into consideration regarding alcoholism of their husbands becoming a major part as well. But when we talk about alcoholism, is it a disorder, or is it someone's willful neglect of family, friends, and so to try and understand, and also there's a correlation between alcoholism and obviously substance use and suicide. So we are really, really delighted to have you, Doctor, to give us your insights in this field. I believe you would also be sharing a personal experience. So thank you so much. Your topic being attention to addiction, listening to the unheard voices. Take it away, Dr. Hakim.
Thanks, Sachin. Thanks for having me. Thank you guys for all being here. So the topic I always get is one of the most trickiest one, right? From all the conditions in the world, physical and mental, the person afflicted with addiction probably has the least sympathy because of how it is portrayed very often. Where do I start? Okay, so one of my starting points is, so around 14 years ago, yeah, that would be around correct. I found myself, I was living in Dubai, and I was very, very seriously considering whether it's worth living or not. And I'd come to that point because I developed an addiction to a variety of substances, including alcohol and cocaine, which made my life, the way I was living it, completely unsustainable. For many years, I had lived in denial of the problem that I have an addiction problem, that I come from a good family, that's supposed to protect me. I was very well educated. I'm a doctor. I can't possibly have an addiction issue, was the thinking that I had at that period of time. And I went through the various cycles of, no, I don't have a problem. And yeah, maybe I have a problem, but I have to cut down. I don't have to quit. And then it was, well, maybe I have to quit, but I don't need anybody's help. And I went through all the final stages in which I finally came to the point in which I realized, no, I have a problem and I need to stop. But the addiction had progressed to such a point that I was unable to stop. And every attempt to stop, followed by the inevitable return to the substance, and that entire roller coaster led me to a point of despair. My self-esteem was in the toilet. I really started believing the narrative that I was told by everybody. Nobody wanted to hang around with me. My career was a shamble. I was in debt because I didn't have any money to support myself, and it became really, really dark. And what I found was that it came to a point in which it really, I was despairing of ever getting out of this, and I thought that the only way was, maybe to end my life. But like Sanskriti said earlier, I didn't have the courage to do it. Maybe there was a saving vestige. I always thought about what I'd put my parents through, and for some reason, however far I'd gone down the ladder, I couldn't bring myself to do that. But I finally did get help, and when I finally became willing to accept help, things started changing. So I went to rehab, I went to a support group fellowship, and things started getting better, and I got my life on track. And it was only after then that I figured out what I wanted to do with my life, right? And it's after that I went abroad and got my master's in clinical psychology. And then I settled down in the US and practiced. I was working at 2 or 3 rehab centers in the US, and I was very, very invested personally in helping people recover from substance abuse and to try to address the stigma that the condition has. Because what I kept hearing in the years that I was using drugs and alcohol was, this is not a disorder, this is a choice, right? That somewhere along the line, you have decided to use substances when you were told that they're not good for you. You have decided to continue using them despite all the consequences. So why the hell are you looking to us for help, empathy, or sympathy, right? So it was one of these really difficult spots to be in, right? And it took me a while to understand. And then when I finally learned about what the nature of addiction was, then I had this mission of trying to spread awareness to a largely unreceptive population out there. I want to make the distinction, though, before I delve into the biology of this, between inebriation, intoxication, and addiction. Right? There are a vast number of people who use substances, alcohol, drugs, marijuana is being legalized all over the world. Right? The vast majority of people, 80% of people who use substances do not develop an addiction. Right? The number is pretty similar to diabetes. We will have a lot of people doing unhealthy eating behaviors, right? Only 20% of the population will develop diabetes. You can eat all the junk in the world, right? Most of us don't have very healthy diets. But only around, if you look globally, somewhere between 18 to 22% of the world will develop diabetes, right? Regardless of what your food habits are. And the same holds for addiction. There's a lot of bad behavior that goes along with intoxication and inebriation of excessive drinking and excessive partying, but that is not addiction, right? There is a big difference between foolish behavior and a clinical disorder. So let me try to break that down with you. When you do start consuming substances like most of us do, maybe in our teenage years, at that point, it is a choice, right? We make a choice and we start ingesting substances. And for a while, it tends to be fun and it tends to be enjoyable for people who like it. For people who don't like it, they don't do it. So how does this work, right? So there is a chemical in our brain called dopamine, which is responsible for pleasure. And whenever I do something pleasurable, I'm getting a small blast of dopamine in this particular part of my brain. So let's say I tell you I enjoy reading books. That means when I'm reading a book, I'm getting, let's say, 100 units of dopamine in this part of my brain. My brain registers this as good and I want to do it again. If more than books, I enjoy music. That means when I'm listening to music, I'm getting 200 or 300 units of dopamine in my brain. Most of these substances, whether you're using heroin or cocaine or alcohol or marijuana, will give you around 300-400 units of dopamine in your brain, but only in people who enjoy it. There'll be a person who will have a drink of alcohol, who will smoke marijuana, and he will not get that release of dopamine, just like some people will not get that while reading a book, and those are the people who don't like reading. But for the people who do like these substances, they'll get roughly around 300 to 400 units of dopamine in the brain. And I'm using these figures just as a metric. These are not actual figures. For the person who's biologically predisposed to addiction, when he uses the same substance, if Sachin and me are sitting and having a drink, Sachin is a normal drinker, he's getting 300 units of dopamine. I'm getting 20,000 units of dopamine, right? That piece is biological. So because I'm getting 20,000 units of dopamine, I am going to seek it out more frequently than Sachin is, and in larger quantities than Sachin is, right? So I will start drinking more frequently. I will start, and I will start drinking larger and larger quantities. And for a while, I will do this without any consequences. In fact, unfortunately, in today's culture, I'll end up looking like a hero who can drink this large quantities of alcohol, is the life of the party, and da-da-da, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. And I will continue doing this for years without any consequences initially kicking in. But what happens over a period of time is because the brain is getting flooded with this level of dopamine, some part of the brain realizes this is going to fry the circuitry over here, right? We got to somehow dampen the effect of dopamine. So it releases another chemical called glutamate. Now, what glutamate is supposed to do is to balance out the impact of dopamine, right? So here I'm drinking, my dopamine is spiking and coming down, but my glutamate is slowly increasing in my brain over a period of time, right? In anticipation of the next dopamine blast. So what happens is I come to a point in which when I am not drinking, when I'm not consuming a substance, my glutamate level is so high that I am feeling constantly miserable. Right? I'm feeling constantly miserable, and the only way I know how to feel marginally better is to take that drink or that drug, get that spike of dopamine. Right? So at that point, I'm fully addicted. I'm drinking for relief. Where do you see this commonly? You see this very commonly in the cigarette smoker, right? A person is smoking 10 cigarettes a day. He's not enjoying every cigarette. He just has to smoke so he doesn't feel terrible. Right? So the commonest form of that is nicotine addiction, but you see it in any addiction. Now, at this point, you've developed a compulsion, right? And at this point, the person who's addicted to the substances will do whatever he needs to do to get the substance, because the distress that one experiences with that level of dopamine, with that level of glutamate, is terrible. Once you come to that point, you're fully addicted, right? And at that time, you will cross any ethical, moral boundary or compass that you ever had to acquire your substance. But there is a way out. The thing is that if you remain abstinent, and this is where rehabs really help, if you remain abstinent from a substance for a long period of time, it's almost like the brain realizes, okay, there's no more dopamine coming, let's reduce the glutamate. In which the glutamate resets, and then you have a normally functioning brain, right? And once you do that, you're out of the woods. The second part of recovery then comes in once the active cravings are actually over. Then this other part of your brain says, you know what, life is good right now. Maybe I can resume drinking, right? And then you resume drinking, and you think you'll just drink a little and get 200 units of dopamine. You drink that first drink, you get 20,000 units, and you're off to the races. You're off chasing it all over again. Which brings me to this topic of relapse, right? And now everybody talks about, oh, there's this big problem about relapse in substance abuse and alcohol addiction. And here's a news flash, right? Relapse is a phenomena you will see whenever you talk of changing any behavior. It's not unique to addiction. Where do we see relapse most often? In dieting, right? We all make up our minds, right, that I need to lose these 5 kilos, and I'm going to start eating these foods, and I'm going to stop eating these foods, and I'm going to be sincere, and I'm going to get a personal trainer, and I'm going to get a gym membership, and I'm going to do da 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 da. And we do it well for a week, for a month, maybe 2 months, and then we have that ice cream, and then once we break the diet, then we say, okay, now for 2 weeks I'll enjoy myself, and then I'll get back on my diet, right? That's relapse. The consequences are not as dramatic and horrific as you see in the addiction process, right? But the process is identical. right? But we don't shame dieters who cheat on the diet nearly half as much as we shame an alcoholic who will have a slip or a relapse. So what would I like to say? You know, I could wax eloquent about this for periods of time, right? Addiction starts. I mean, substance use starts as a choice, right? But after a sufficient period of choice, when the neurotransmitters in the brain are realigned, in which the dopamine is perpetually low and the glutamate is perpetually high, there is no choice, right? There is only compulsion. The compulsion then leads to bad behaviors. Recovery works. If you actually go to a clinical program with an experienced therapist, you can stop using no matter what drug you're using, no matter how long you've been using it, you can stop. It's been, I think, 23 or 24 years since I've gotten high in any shape, way, or form, right? So if anybody tells you that it can't be done, right, or you're always going to relapse, don't believe them. There is hope. There are a bunch of treatment centers across the country. We are one of them. If there is anybody that you know, you yourself or anybody in your family that is suffering from addiction, there is a way out, right? And it doesn't have to come to the point of despair, like me sitting alone in that bedroom in Dubai wondering whether I want to live or not. There's help way before that. Thank you so much, Sachin, for giving me this time.
Thank you, Doctor, so much. I mean, the insight you're bringing from the perspective of alcoholic or substance addiction, coming from the point of view how even there's such a biological take to it as well that a lot of us tend to ignore. So thank you so much for bringing us those valuable insights. And now we will be moving to our next speaker. Again, where is Amrita? If I can, yes. So we have our next speaker. I'm just pinning her up. Wonderful. So we have Amrita Tripathi here, the founder of Health Collective. And I'm really pleased because Amrita will be bringing in the context from a journalistic perspective or a media perspective. Amrita Tripathi is the founder editor of the Health Collective, which centers around stories of lived experience, mental health and illness from an Indian lens. And they are also the founder of Tap in Tribe for women and leadership. She has 20 years of work experience in the media as a senior news anchor and health editor, as well as in digital, most recently as the head of content partnerships with Twitter India. Her fiction, Broken News from 2010 and The Sibious Knot deal with the darker side of urban realities. And Tripathi has also co-authored the non-fiction Mindscape series of books on mental health with leading psychologists called Real Stories of Dealing with Depression, Young Mental Health, and the Age of Anxiety. Tripathi is most recently co-authored Life Interrupted, Understanding India's Suicide Crisis with Dr. Soumitra Pathare and Dr. Abhijit Nadkarni, who are also one of the leading people in the country who are talking about this subject, along with Dr. Lakshmi Vijay Kumar as well, who Kamaini had earlier spoken about. Thank you so much, Amrita. We are delighted to have you here. And you are going to be the topic, your topic will be role of journalism in prevention of suicide. Thank you so much and take it away.
Thank you so much, Sachin. Thank you, Renu. And what a stellar group of speakers we've heard from. It's very hard to follow on that, but I'm really pleased to be here with you. So this is the book. I keep waving it around because, you know, we wanted to get more people to read this book. As Sachin said, Dr. Nadkarni and Dr. Pathare are leading voices in this field. We interviewed Dr. Lakshmi. I'm going to just take a step back and tell you that I set up the Health Collective actually several years ago, precisely because somebody had tweeted at that time, someone I didn't know, that their friend was sitting in Mumbai and very distressed, and they didn't know who to reach out to. I saw this tweet 2 days later, and I sort of DM'd and said, you know, I'm sure by now somebody's connected you to someone. And as a former health editor, I had all of this information. I presumed everyone had this information. This is very privileged Mumbai, and I was shocked that this person said no. So his friend had been sitting around for 2 days, acutely depressed and distressed. Of course, I sent some helplines and some contacts, but I decided at that point that the least I could do is put that information together and start shipping it. Slowly, we started getting more and more stories, and that's how the Health Collective was really born. But I will start this just by talking a little bit about the role of the media. It's the industry I love the most. It was my chosen career for a long time. I kicked off this chapter on suicide in the media. I'll just read a few lines for you. My first job was as an intern at a radio channel. One blistering, confusing summer, that infernal gap between high school and college, skipping ahead, I was all confusion, unsure of myself in a new city at the cusp of young adulthood. And my first boss was everything you could hope for: smart, witty, grounded, and with a keen eye that missed nothing. I'll always remember him as a force of nature. He's also the first person I know of who died by suicide. Reasons unknown and unknowable. Fast forward 20 years, which is when I set the Health Collective up. But in that process, I was working at a news channel. And it was there that we realized, a national news channel with the best intentions, that as much as we wanted to get stories of mental health on air, mental illness, talk about them with an India lens, we inevitably only covered very difficult issues like suicide, like many of you are hearing about today. Despite how common it is, what a crisis it's become for India and other countries, we only covered them when there was a horrific celebrity death. We only covered them in a way that was sensationalized. I remember, and I write about this, 25-year-old actor Jia Khan, just recently 34-year-old actor Sushant Singh Rajput. Watching that tamasha made so many of us so upset, because it just feels like we haven't learned anything as the media. Now, this is long before the Press Council of India had come up with guidelines. I'd actually sent the Samaritans guidelines and some of the global ones as well to our newsroom, to our news editors, saying, look, there are very, very important and critical guidelines for the media. Now, why do we say that? In this book, we talk a little bit about how there's so much research that's been done that shows that this contagion effect, or the Werther effect as it's called, is very, very rampant, which means essentially every time the media reports on a suicide, people are learning, figuring out ways people who are at risk or vulnerable are imitating and losing their lives. That's a direct link that the media can observe and correct for in the way they report. Dr. Lakshmi, who Sachin mentioned, set up India's first suicide prevention helpline back in the day, Sneha. It's been going nonstop since the mid-80s. She was telling us about this new study that showed that celebrity suicide specifically, there's a spike in suicide attempts based on media coverage of celebrity suicide. Someone spoke about this earlier today. Think of Robin Williams, Kate Spade, Anthony Boleyn. The way the media reports on these things has a direct impact. And I want you to think about one more thing, because many of you are not in the media, so you might be like, why is she going on and on? I say this with all, with a lot of humility. Many of us are now in that position where with our social media accounts, any one of us can be considered someone who has an influence or is actually able to move the dialogue this way or that. So this is not something that's anymore in sort of some, castle in the air for the media wallahs to worry about. Now, we've spoken about what happens when you have this vulnerable, stigmatized group. The flip side is, Dr. Lakshmi Vijayakumar told us, in keeping with this theme of hope, there is the opposite, the Papageno effect. So if you are showing stories of people, and I think Sanskriti spoke about this very movingly, it's not a binary, it is a continuum. But if you can focus on some of the stories without putting that sort of toxic positivity shield on it, but you can feature people who've moved past that crisis, who can talk realistically person to person, who can share their stories having survived, that has an immediate positive impact as well. And I think, in fact, what we have noticed is, through the Health Collective, where I decided, we can't wait around for the mainstream media to do this. Like I said, many of us now have that kind of option with social media to, flatline some of those hierarchies. So we've started sharing more of these stories. And I think one of the things that's staying with me from all of this, lived experience stories we're hearing today, including from Dr. Hakim, there's this pallor of shame. There's this thing of stigma. There is this thing of victim blaming. We heard from Sanskriti as well, how people made her feel weak, not quite there. Is she intelligent enough to, merit psychological treatment? All of these myths are things that each and every one of us actually can play a role in addressing. When we talk about stigma, it's not something out there. It's something that we need to be looking at in our own lives. So I might not have a platform like this tomorrow. I might not be at a national news channel tomorrow, but how am I treating that friend who comes up to tell me something very distressing? Our initial reaction, if you don't do these kind of gatekeeper training, or what people were telling us about learning about empathy, our first reaction tends to be, and this happened with me as well, you tend to be like, oh, no. You minimize, right? If Sachin is telling me I'm feeling terrible, things are awful, my first reaction will be like, oh, no, you have it so good. Look at this, look at your life, blah, 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 be happy for what you have. And what happens as a result of that, your friend is never going to come back to you again. So my limited point here is there's a role for each and every one of us, whether we're in the media, whether we are formally in the media, or if we even have social media accounts, we need to learn how to use these very responsibly. The very least thing we can do is learn how to actually listen and practice this empathy. And there's actually, I've realized, little point in only doing this once a year when Suicide Prevention Day comes along, right? The idea is to raise this awareness and keep moving that, moving that baton forward. We need to be expanding these safe spaces. We need to be having more of these conversations in our real lives. And we need to understand that these myths and the stigma are being perpetuated by many of us. We think things like, somebody is weak, so they couldn't hack it. We think things like this is something that we shouldn't be talking about. Oh my God, we've seen corporates, or when we talk to corporates as well, they don't want to talk about mental illness. They want to talk about, I think what you call it, that feel-good stuff, right? The mental well-being. They don't want to talk about actual realities. So I think whatever our role is, and I'll come back to the media in a second, whatever our role though is today, there is a very, very high chance that you're having an impact on many more people than you realize, right? Whether you're using social media, if you're seeing your national media of choice as well, flouting these kind of guidelines, and I'm sure you'll find them in the handouts that you get. The Samaritans has them. Like I said, the Press Council of India also has them. You should be taking your editors and media channels and anchors of choice. You should actually be putting them on the spot and saying, this is not something that should fly. The Center for Mental Health Law and Policy has the Project Siren, where they evaluate the media now. It's just been a couple of years. But I want to take one step back and say, again, there's no point having a blame game, right? None of us are born knowing all of these things. None of us really knows how to deal with this, even in the media. My friends who are journalists, and many of them are still journalists, were really actually surprised and shocked when I told them you could have an impact that is as far as saving someone's life. Preventing them from taking their own life, in my mind, is going that far as to say you're saving a life. The reason, and we spoke to Sachin Kalbag, a senior editor for this, we spoke to several journalists about what happens when news breaks. It's only very recently that India decriminalized the attempt to suicide, right? It's been a few years. It is groundbreaking, but it's not actually trickled down to the rest of the country, as many of you know. The first thing that happens is that story gets assigned, usually to a city reporter or to someone on the crime beat. So that reporter is actually getting a call from his source, who is in the police. The police may or may not have been sensitized about how you go about talking about suicide. So the police will give him all of the detail, if it's a good source, and that's what the reporter has been building up. The police will give that reporter, he will give them the details. There was this death, this was the attempt, this is what happened, this is a suicide note. Every story follows that same script. Every single story in the front page of any of our leading newspapers, on our primetime shows, is flouting all of those guidelines, because you're not supposed to talk about the method, you're not supposed to sensationalize, you're not supposed to put it in a headline. We've been really racking our brains to be like, what is the actual reason this is a news story? Right? I think that's something that reporters have not been able to come back to us with. And I also struggle to say, of course, you can understand that, in the old days, it was, if it bleeds, it leads. That was the gory thing about the news business. So if it's a celebrity death, you have to cover it. But there are responsible ways of going about that. I'll come back to what is the potential for impact. And I know we've been kind of behind on time, so I'm not going to take too much longer. I spoke about how we heard that these guidelines can be a kind of guiding light. They can offer hope. The way you tell these stories can actually have a very, very positive impact. And that's something Dr. Lakshmi was telling us as well. And we also had Tanmoy Goswami, actually a wonderful friend and one of these first contributors for the Health Collective, who has set up Sanity by Tanmoy, which some of you would have seen. He wrote this article for us, and I'll quote, "History shows that real change can happen surprisingly quickly. Between 1984 and mid-1987, the subway system in Vienna saw a sharp increase in suicide. It was a terrible time. The beleaguered city introduced guidelines for responsible reporting, and just as dramatically, there was a 75% decrease in the rate of subway suicides, a 20% decrease in the overall suicide rate in Vienna." So training journalists to report responsibly on suicide, they also imposed a media blackout, in fact, on that reporting. They've both been found to be effective in population-level suicide prevention. So again, this is what your media needs to know. This is something you can actually tweet at. This is the beautiful thing about social media. Any of these, anchors, reporters, editors, and I can tell you for a fact, none of these people want to be doing the wrong thing. They're not sitting there and very cynically saying I don't care if everybody cares about the human and the family at the heart of that. Two things I will leave you with. speaking to the survivors of suicide loss. This is again something for the media, but something for each of us. When you speak to somebody who has lost somebody they love to suicide, the most heartbreaking thing happens, because they tell you they feel doubly bereaved. They feel they're not even allowed to mourn, because their friends, neighbors continue that stigma, make them feel guilty. Actually, somebody told us the first person to land up was the police, who tried to blame them for the tragic loss. They feel vulnerable and stigmatized themselves. There's very little support for survivors of suicide loss. So I think I'll come back to the final point in the keeping of, just keeping time in mind. Each of us has a role to play here. You can hold your media accountable, you can hold the police accountable, but we can equally hold ourselves accountable. It's not that easy to learn empathy, but it's not that difficult either. So gatekeeping courses, maybe follow the work Sachin and his team are doing, look at what the Samaritans guidelines are, and let's keep each other accountable for all of this. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amrita. I think it's such a valuable insight to have for the media. I mean, I think today what we are luckiest to have through these talks, today's talk, is everyone from these different sectors being able to show what is actually happening there, right? With media, for example, with the first example of one of the first examples, there was this movie, Ek Duje Ke Liye, which had the protagonist and the two protagonists dying by suicide at the end by jumping off a cliff. And that year, because the movie had become a hit, I mean, I'm talking more from news media and then Bollywood as well. The media goes on till the entertainment bit as well, right? And that same year, post that movie, almost 47 couples died by suicide. That was part of a copycat suicide, part of the contagion. But even here, a lot of us fail to see how this impact happens. Where suicide is the main issue here, we fail to see it may sound dark, but it cannot be more unreal. Like, nobody gets trained on how to die. We don't know how to die. We don't know how to kill ourselves. And one of the reasons why it's also considered that the suicide rate is high amongst doctors and even Jawans is because they know to do that. They know how to do that. And so when we are coming back to this context, what is happening is when people are going through the different levels of suicidal ideation, one of those levels is that they are ideating, they have a strong suicidal ideation, but they do not know how to kill themselves. And that's when the media reporting that comes up, sensationalizing the person did this, they were going through this particular anxiety or this particular issue, it was a girlfriend issue, it was a career issue, and falana. It's really sensationalizing the topic and then telling how the person did it.
Yeah, Sachin, I'll just jump in there because that does remind me. One of the things that I just blew my mind when we were doing the research for this is if you remove access to those lethal means of ending our lives, and we shared some of these examples from the neighborhood, right? Sri Lanka's done some amazing work. Bangladesh, yes, removing access to toxic pesticides. That's what I think the media should be doing as storytelling. So yes, yeah, absolutely concur with you on that. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much, Amrita. And without further ado, we have Dr. Peter Castellino joining us here today. Let me see if I can find Dr.
Yeah, hi.
There we are. So, Dr. Peter Castellino, I mean, I'm so honored to have you here with us, sir. Just to introduce him, even though he's the last speaker here, but we were having him as the last speaker to try and bring in all the different sectors and conversations on suicide that we have had today, to hopefully through his own experience of working in this area for so long, to try and build, with the information that that he will provide, it will all kind of come in together. So let me introduce Dr. Peter Castellino, who is the founder and managing director of UAE Mental Health Foundation in Goa. Dr. Peter Castellino, as I said, is the founder and the managing director for UAE, which runs a suicide prevention program in Goa and is also a consultant psychiatrist having his own private practice. This year completes 10 years of Distress Suicide Helpline, which is part of network of helplines under Befrienders worldwide. He has initiated programs in psychosocial rehabilitation of people with psychological disabilities, as well as geriatric and dementia care, besides creating community mental health services. He is a past president of the Psychiatric Society of Goa, member of the Goa State Mental Health Authority, member of the Disability Commission of Goa, Chairman of the State IMA Committee on Suicide Prevention, and Substance Abuse member of the International Association for Suicide Prevention. That's a mouthful, but it doesn't get over there. He's also a fellow of the Indian Psychiatric Society and has received the Bagadia Award for their community work. His project, Geriatric Digital Intervention Program, also won the prestigious Pre Perspectives Award in Switzerland last year. Really honored to have you here with us, Dr. Castellino. Please take it away. Your topic today is Challenges in Suicide Intervention, Psychiatric and Social Outlook. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sachin. And I mean, thank you for all the speakers, the previous speakers, I mean, who's really set a very good a ground field and understanding of suicide. And I think I have a very difficult task at hand. I just would like to tell you that my net connection is unstable over here. I had to get out of, I mean, I got out of the meeting a few times. So in case I get out, I'll get back in, right? Yeah. So as Sachin introduced me, I am a psychiatrist. And I mean, I assume that as a psychiatrist, I do a lot of good work, hopefully. But I feel very, very helpless also. There's this strong sense of helplessness that comes in when there are so many people that we meet on a daily basis where we're not able to help them to the extent we would like to. In a very clinical setting, there is very limited scope of help. And therefore, many years back, almost 22 years back, I set up this foundation to broaden the scope of work that we can do for every person that comes in. Because psychiatry for a long time, and even till today, is seen in a very medical perspective, very biological. But we know that human behavior is not only biological. There's so many other elements to it. There's a social element, there's a cultural element, there is the families, there is the very essence of who that person is, his own tastes, his own desires, what he wants as an individual. And when we begin to see mental health in that broad perspective, the work that we do as clinicians sometimes becomes very narrow. And I've experienced that over a period of time, and therefore it was so important that we built networks with people, with like-minded people that can support people going through stress. Now, as we are aware and as we've heard the statistics and we've understood it, suicide is a real problem. And many of our panelists over here have experienced the thought of suicide. And it is not something from that has come out of weakness or something that we have done to ourselves. It just pops into our mind. It just pops in, and the very fact that we do not know how to deal with it or how to deal with our current situations may sometimes lead a person to ending or taking that drastic step. But the interesting thing over here is people who are suicidal, they actually ask for help. Almost around 80% of people, they do ask for help, and in ways that may be either direct or majority indirectly. It is we who are untrained or maybe are trained partially who are unable to pick on these signs. And when we're not able to pick on these signs, the people who are actually communicating this distress to us feel more frustrated, more isolated. As we know, there is that stigma to even express the thought. It's not easy. It's not easy for any individual to express this thought that he is thinking of dying. The way that person would be perceived, whether he'd be considered as a weak person, a selfish person, he's only thinking about himself, and especially when a woman who's got a family, she thinks of dying. When the thought comes to kill herself, and if she expresses this to someone else, she may be considered as a selfish person. In religious terms, it was considered as sinful, and therefore it is very important how we use the language. We have to stop refraining ourselves from using the word commit. It's no more a sin. I mean, do some religions do consider it sinful, but we know it comes from a very innate, uh, uh, I wouldn't say innate, but from a point where a person is unable to cope with the current situation, or the thought just the person is battling with that thought. No religion, I think, would consider that as sinful. Uh, no more, it's the Mental Health Care Act of 2017 has decriminalized suicide. So no more it is considered as a crime. So I think we need to stop using the word commit. We need to start using right words, not using the words successful, unsuccessful suicide. We should not say the person is suicidal or he is suicidal. As soon as you say he is suicidal, we are labeling that person. He is feeling suicidal would be a better term. So it's very important that we use the right language in order for people to come and express more directly rather than through indirect means their feelings and their ideas of suicide. One, as I mentioned, psychiatry for a very long time has been medicalized, and suicide, the very act of suicide, has also been seen in the lens of um, of biology, of a medical disorder. But we know better. We know, and we know that mental disorders, though very real and though a huge contributor of suicide, are just some part of the total suicides. They contribute only some part. In India, especially, you see problems of marriage, relationships, economic problems, substance use, as domestic violence, as actually forerunners of the causes of suicide. And therefore, it's important to look at it more broad based and not to really put the pressure on the person that he is responsible for this, because it is a collective responsibility. It is a responsibility of families. It is a responsibility of the community. It's a responsibility of the state, of the laws that are in existence. It is a responsibility of every single individual of how we treat other people. So when we look at suicide, and when we look at especially survivors of suicide, it's important that they understand that they are victims of possibly their distress, and there is a collective responsibility. So it is up to all of us to create systems that would actually be conducive to someone who is feeling suicidal. And that reminds me of one of my patients that came in some I think 2 or 3 years back, and she had an appointment with me at 10 o'clock. Unfortunately, she came in at around 11 o'clock. Because she came in, I somehow tried to squeeze her into my other appointments. I couldn't give her the full time. I just had to give her probably 5 or 10 minutes. But in that 5 or 10 minutes, she expressed her desire to end her life. Now, I was sandwiched between my appointments and seeing her, and so I played it easy. I told her, see, I know you're feeling suicidal, but please go home, get your mom over here so that we can discuss a safety plan. I felt, even as I was saying that, I felt so helpless because I knew that there was a risk over here. We tried calling up the mother, she wasn't picking up the call. We tried calling up other people, no one is picking up the call. So I said, you go home and you come back. But she never reached home. Midway, she ended her life. This, for me, has opened up the need to have systems in place. Like someone was talking about a one-stop crisis center. Yes, in the place where I live, I mean in Mapsa in Goa, there is a one-stop crisis center, but it is not functional. So it is important that we create systems of referrals, systems where a person, very often if a person is feeling suicidal, doctors would say, okay, send them to the hospital, but they do not need the hospital. And very often the only hospital that would take them at that time is the government hospital. Many of them do not want to go and Okay. Am I back on?
Yes. Yes, you
Yes.
are on. You were sharing about they do not want to go to the
Yes.
government hospitals. Yes, please.
Yeah, they do not want to go to a government hospital. They would want to go into a place where they feel more accepted, more loved, where they can just be themselves, where they can share their distress and feel accepted. And sometimes, very often, that's all that is required. It's all that is required. There's just I won't say a small percentage, but a, probably a small percentage of people who actually require hospitalization because their suicidal intent is of that intensity, which cannot come down by just plain empathetic listening. And therefore, yes, they would need to have maybe a medical kind of treatment where drugs, ECTs are given. But a large number of people need just empathetic listening and a safe space to recover for that period of time, which again is non-existent in our state and in our country. We do, as many people have mentioned, we do have the National Suicide Prevention Strategy, which is a strategy which looks at collective responsibility, where it's a multidisciplinary responsibility, where every sector of the government, be it the education sector, we've had an educationist who spoke, and it's so important that we have a school mental health program in place where students have access to awareness, they have access to counseling, they have access to a kind of an integrated approach of the school with the parents, with the teachers, as well as with the mental health professionals. Uh, it's important that we have the PWD on board. In Goa, there were two bridges which are hotspots of suicide in Goa. One bridge, after a campaign that Koja ran, has now put railings on that bridge. And after the railings that have been put up, that place is no more prone to suicide. There is another bridge which we are hoping, and we've been kind of campaigning with the government to actually put in safety measures like patrolling, put the helpline number, have no pedestrians on that bridge. People cannot stop on that bridge, and also have safety nets. We are campaigning with the government, but again, it is a process. It is a process. We need, the previous speaker spoke about how sometimes when the media promotes certain methods of suicide, how those become the means that are being used now. And in Goa, this was the case, where a particular celebrity, I would say, mistress ended her life through a particular means. That means was never known. But then the media wrote so much about that means that now that has become one of the main ways in which people are ending their life. So again, it's important that the government, through the agricultural department, actually sets the rules for the safe storage, safe sale of certain pesticides, rodenticides, and especially to students. We had another case where a student in her uniform went to a particular shop and bought a rodenticide and consumed that rodenticide and died to suicide. Again, if the law was implemented, the law is there, but it's not implemented. If the law is implemented, definitely that child would not have been able to have access to this rodenticide. So what we're seeing, there is this collective responsibility from everyone, and it's important that we all play our part so that together we can actually help to reduce the rate of suicide in our country. But again, I would like to say that all is not lost. Definitely, we have moved from a time 10 years back in Goa when we even just utter the word suicide, people would not want us to come into the institutions to give any awareness. Because the idea that talking about suicide would actually would create suicidal thoughts in people who are distressed. Today, where educational institutions are actually calling us, they want to have programs. They themselves are now celebrating Suicide Prevention Week, observing Suicide Prevention Week, and having their own programs. The media, there is a shift in the reporting of media through several programs of ours, where now they're beginning to to follow the guidelines set by the WHO, set by the ISP, set by the Press Council of India. We've seen a shift in the mindset of people where now they're willing to take help, to seek help. We've seen this more with younger people, where there's absolutely no qualms. Initially, when I started my practice around 30 years back, it would be very difficult. I mean, young people were brought in by their parents. Today, we see young people coming in and they say, see, doc, can I pay you once I start working? Because if I tell my parents will say, why are you going to a shrink? So there is this shift. But yes, I think through more of our campaigns, the more voices that speak out, the more we talk about it, there is this general awareness that is being created. And hopefully with time, at least now we have the National Suicide Prevention Strategy, hopefully we will see the implementation taking place through stages, but I think we should not stop talking. And I think that is the message that I want to give out over here, that we should not stop talking. We should continue in our quest, in our journey, because it's not a linear journey. It's going to be ups and downs, but hopefully in the last few years, we've seen the shift. We've seen more organizations coming out, talking about suicide and doing suicide work. So these are all positive things. We are seeing more companies also trying to fund suicide prevention work, which is again something more positive. I think we should not stop. And I thank Sachin for having this, conducting this program and bringing such eminent speakers from different walks of life to share such gems. I think a wealth of knowledge, of wisdom, of experiences, and definitely we can continue working together. Yes, thank you, Sachin.
Thank you, Dr. Castellino. It was really, really insightful of you to kind of bring up the whole perspective, coming from a psychiatric background yourself and operating with the suicide prevention helpline or emotional support helpline, and so many other areas that you are kind of supporting in Goa. It's absolutely brilliant to have you and hear those insights as well. I just wanted to kind of, because it is over 2.5 hours as well, I just wanted to quickly check with everyone. That was our last speaker. Again, thanking each and every speaker, but also thanking the audience who have been really patient and not just patient, but so engaged. And we could still see the messages coming in between and how you are still engaging with the speakers as well. So that was brilliant. And thank you so much for being so open about being part of this conversation. Just to kind of recap what we have taken away from all the amazing speakers that we had, all the amazing 8 speakers that we have had today, that suicide, what we are seeing is that suicide is one of the most talked about terms in, let's say, socially on a media scale and everything. However, it is something that we do not talk about in our own day-to-day lives amongst the people who really matter to us. Right? I hope through today's session, we are also able to see how someone having suicidal thoughts is not them necessarily telling you that they are weak or they are trying to get attention for themselves or any other conscious expression of inability is not what is happening. It means, if to give you a definition of suicide, suicide is when the pain of living exceeds the fear of dying. So I would let that rest for a second. Just imagine what we are talking about here. The only problem when we talk about that, when the pain of living exceeds the fear of dying, is the only pain that as human beings we tend to be aware of is our own. It's very rare for us to be aware of, even though it's common sense, that someone else, someone on the other side is also going through pain. But sometimes this pain could be so much that having suicidal thoughts or even considering suicide can become one of the only options that they experience. But that too is not a conscious choice that they are having here. Just like Dr. Castellino mentioned, these are intrusive thoughts. These are thoughts that come into the human being, and it is only through open communication, empathic listening, and actually wanting to be of help to the person rather than just give any trope of advice or motivation or distraction, actually engaging with the person and listening to them. And this is the consistent message that we have received from all the industry experts, that the simplest, and I mean, suicide, even though is one of the biggest killers in the world currently, it is also the most preventable forms of death. And the only thing that is stopping us, the cause of suffering, like I had mentioned at the start of the call, is the wrong knowledge, especially the wrong sources of knowledge that we collect this information about suicide. Instead, I hope through this session and you continuing to educate yourself about mental health, psychological health, and suicide, you would be much, much better equipped at not just dealing with your own stresses, but also helping the people around you connect better and live a long, successful, or fruitful life. With that, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. It was absolutely lovely and exciting to listen to all the speakers as well. We will be sharing more details shortly. To connect with us, please find our links on the side. Currently, our website is still under construction in terms of we are just going through a relaunch. We will be relaunching on the 10th of September. But till then, please find our social media handles as well, so that like, share, and subscribe, so that more and more people get aware, get to know about the work that all of these amazing people are doing. So with that, thank you again so much. And if you have any questions, me and the members of Connect Hut would be the last ones to leave. We will be stopping the recording now.